Hello and welcome back to chapter 2 of a three-parter, which is Lizzie Leigh by Elizabeth Gaskell. An interesting little tale where I've decided I don't like many of the male characters. I feel like they were written to be kind of disagreeable. Although I don't know, I wasn't around in Victorian times. These were probably considered the model of upright gentlemanliness. That is a really long word. Anyway, to my modern sensibilities, they seem terrible, but that's kind of one of the fun parts about reading older fiction is you can look back at it and go, look at those backwards people. And then it hits you that probably in 40 or 50 years, people will be looking back on what we read going, look at those backwards people. And so the cycle goes on and on. I actually was supposed to read this yesterday, and I got massively distracted by, I think, the best Northern Lights show that I've ever seen. Normally, when you see the Northern Lights, you see just a white light. It doesn't register the colors to the naked eye most of the time. Every once in a while you'll see like a faint ghost green, but to the naked eye you just see these beautiful pulses and pillars of white light. And then when you take pictures, you set a long exposure, and because you can set the long exposure, the camera with its wider range of light sensing actually picks up all the colors. And then you look at the pictures and go, oh, that's beautiful. Last night, you could see the reds and the pinks with the naked eye, along with the incredible just strobing white lights. It was literally like being outside in some sort of a cosmic rave, and it was very cool. I took so many pictures, and I took the unedited ones because what I usually do is I'll look through the unedited ones, and they're beautiful. Like, they're fantastic, but you can make them look almost as good as a professional photographer just by like upping the color saturation a little bit, turning the contrast either higher or lower. So I've been playing with some of those today and just making them amazingly phenomenal. But the ones that I put out in the video that came out this morning were the raw and unedited pictures. That was exactly how the pictures came out before I played Tinker Toys with them. And I think for raw unedited pictures, they were beautiful. So it was a good night. But I was up till about 2 o'clock in the morning playing Look at the Cosmic Light Show and snapping pictures and just absolutely marveling that normally I have to look out towards the north, and you'll see them off in the north, but last night they were directly overhead, they were to the south, they were to the east, they were the entire sky was lit up, and it was very, very cool. So yeah, as a result, I was playing with the Northern Lights and didn't read. And then today I've been lazy. So it's now 4 o'clock, and this goes up. It's supposed to go up in a couple of hours. So I figured I should probably sit down and read it, because I also, knock on wood, well, knock on cobwebs, I also have a live stream tonight if we keep power, because it's flickered on us 3 different times. We're not getting storms, but we're getting some intense wind. Nothing like what happened in the south this week, but still pretty good wind gusts, and depending on how well the trees stay upright is depending on how my ability to actually stream tonight will be. We'll see. I'm also, if you are interested just in something that's a lot of fun and a good cause. I think I am going to be streaming tomorrow, which is Saturday night as well. I'll probably go live about 6 or 6:30 Eastern. Um in World of Warcraft for like the last 14 years, which is pretty good considering World of Warcraft is turning 20 this year. But for like the last 14 years in World of Warcraft, every year on a very specific server, groups of people would gather together and create a level 1 pink-haired gnome and run from the gnome starting area all the way across the map through dangers untold and hardships unnumbered. And the run with the pink-haired gnomes was specifically to raise breast cancer awareness. And I've been doing it every year for probably the last 6 at least. I might have missed one in the last 6, but I haven't missed very many. And then at the end of it, everybody piles onto a boat and they head to Ogrimmar, which is the opposite faction's capital, and everybody tries to kiss whoever the current leader of that is. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of little gnome corpses, but you know what? It's just a silly good time, and it's for a good cause. So I will probably be streaming that starting tomorrow night about 6:30 Eastern. I'm really bad at time zones, so I don't know what that is for anybody else, but 6:30 Eastern is what time I will probably go live. Anyway, enough of all of my silliness. It is time to read chapter 2 of Lizzie Leigh by Elizabeth Gaskell. Mother, then said Will, why will you keep on thinking she's alive? If she were but dead, we need never name her name again. We've heard naught on her since father wrote her that letter. We never know whether she got it or not. She left her place before then. Many a one dies is... Oh, my lad, do not speak so to me, or my heart will break outright, said his mother with a sort of cry. Then she calmed herself, for she yearned to persuade him to her own beliefs. Thou never asked, and thou art too like thy father for me to tell without asking. But it were all to be near Lizzie's old place that I settled down on this side of Manchester. And the very day after we came, I went to her old missus and asked to speak a word with her. I had a strong mind to cast it up to her, that she should have sent my poor lass away without telling it on us first. But she were in black, and looked so sad I could not find it on my heart to threep it up. But I did ask her a bit about our Lizzie. The master would have turned her away at a day's warning. He's gone to the other place. I hope he'll meet with more mercy than he showed our Lizzie, I surely do. And when the missus asked her, should she write to us, she said Lizzie shook her head. And when she speak to her again, the poor lass went down on her knees and begged her not, for she said it would break my heart, as it has done, Will. God knows it has, said the poor mother, choking with her struggle to keep down her hard, overmastering grief. And her father would curse her. Oh, God, teach me to be patient. She could not speak for a few minutes, and the lass threatened and said that she would go drown herself in the canal if the missus wrote home. And so, well, I'd got a trace of my child. The missus thought she had gone to the workhouse to be nursed, and there I went, and sure enough she had been. And they'd turned her out as soon as she was strong and told her she was young enough to work, but whatten kind of work be open to her, lad, with a baby to keep? Will listened to his mother's tale with deep sympathy, not unmixed with the old bitter shame. But the opening of her heart had unlocked his, and after a while he spoke. Mother, I think I'd better go home. Tom can stay with thee. I know I should stay too, but I cannot stay in this place so near to her without craving to see her. Susan Palmer, I mean. Has the old Palmer telled me on a daughter? Said Mrs. Leigh. Aye, he has. I love her above a bit, and it's because I love her I want to leave Manchester, that's all. Mrs. Leigh tried to understand this speech for some time, but found it difficult of interpretation. Well, why should thou not tell her that thou lovest her? Thou art a likely lad, and sure of work. Thou'lt have up close at my death, and as for that, I could leave it to thee now, and keep myself by doing a bit of charring. It seems to me a very backward sort of way of winning her to think of leaving Manchester. Oh, mother, she's so gentle and so good. She's downright holy. She's never known a touch of sin, and can I ask her to marry me, knowing what we do about Lizzie and fearing worse? I doubt if one like her could ever care for me, but if she knew about my sister, it would put a gulf between us, and she'd shudder at the thought of crossing it. You don't know how good she is, mother. Will, if she's good as thou sayest, she'll have pity on such as my Lizzie. If she has no pity for such, she's a cruel Pharisee, and thou art best without her. But he only shook his head and sighed, and for a time the conversation dropped. But a new idea sprang up in Mrs. Leigh's head. She thought that she would go and see Susan Palmer and speak up for Will and tell her the truth about Lizzie, and according to her pity for the poor sinner, would she be worthy or unworthy of him. She resolved to go the very next afternoon, but without telling anyone of her plan. Accordingly, she looked out the Sunday clothes that she had never before had the heart to unpack since coming to Manchester, but which she now desired to appear in order to be a credit to Will. She put on her old-fashioned black mode bonnet trimmed with real lace, her scarlet cloth cloak, which she had ever since she was married and was always spotlessly clean. So she set forth on her unauthorized embassy. She knew the Palmers lived in Crow Street, though where she had heard it she could not tell, and modestly asking her way, she arrived on the street about 4:15. She stopped to inquire the exact number, and the woman to whom she addressed it told her that Susan Palmer's school would not be loosed till 4, and asked her to step in and wait until then at her house. "For," she said, smiling, "them that want Susan Palmer wants a kind friend of ours. So we, in a manner, call cousins. Sit down, missus, sit down. I'll wipe the chair so it shanna dirty your cloak. My mother used to wear them bright cloaks, and they're right grandly things agin a green field." "Have you known Susan Palmer long?" said Mrs. Leigh, pleased with the admiration of her cloak. "Ever since they come to live on our street. Our Sally goes to her school." "Whatten sort of lass is she? For I had never seen her." "Well, for looks I cannot say. It's so long since I first knowed her that I clean forgotten what I thought of her then. My master says he never saw such a smile for gladdening the heart. But it may be not looks you're asking about. The best thing I can say of her looks is that she's just one a stranger would stop in the street to ask for help from if he needed it. All the little childer creeps as close as they can to her. She'll have as many as 3 or 4 hanging on her apron all at once." "Is she cocket at all?" "Cocket, bless you! You never saw a creature less set up in all your life. Her father's cocket enough. No, she's not cocket in any way. You've not heard much of Susan Palmer, I reckon, if you think she's cocket. I wonder what cocket means. Sidebar, I have no idea what that word is supposed to mean. It must be one of those country sayings that Elizabeth Gaskell liked to use. She's just one to come quietly in and do the very thing most wanted. Little things, maybe, that anyone could do, but that few would think on for another. She'll bring her thimble with her, and mend up after the childer o' nights, and she writes all Betty Harker's letters to her grandchild out at service, and she's in nobody's way, and that's a great matter, I take it. Here's the childer running past. School is loosed. You'll find her now, missus, ready to hear and help. But we none of us frab her by going near her in school time. Poor Mrs. Leigh's heart began to beat, and she could almost have turned around and gone home again. Her country breeding had made her shy of strangers, and this Susan Palmer appeared to her like a real born lady by all accounts. So she knocked with a timid feeling at the indicated door, and when it was open, dropped a simple curtsy without speaking. Susan held her little niece in her arms, curled up with a fond endearment against her breast, but put her gently down to the ground, and instantly placed a chair in the best corner of the room for Mrs. Leigh when she told her who she was. "It's not Will has asked me to come," said the mother apologetically. "I'd a wish to just speak to you myself." Susan colored up to her temples and stooped to pick up the toddling girl. In a minute or two, Mrs. Leigh began again. "Will thinks you would not respect us if you knew all, but I think you could not help feeling for us because in the sorrow God has put upon us. So I just put on my bonnet and came off unknownst to the lads. Everyone says you're very good, and that the Lord keep you from falling from his ways, but maybe you've never been tried and tempted as some is. I'm perhaps speaking too plain, but my heart's welly broken, and I can't be a choice in my words as them who are happy can. Well now, I'll tell you the truth. Will dreads you to hear of it, but I'll just tell it to you. You mun know. But here the poor woman's words failed her, and she could do nothing but sit rocking backwards and forwards with sad eyes, straight gazing into Susan's face, as if they tried to tell the tale of agony which the quivering lips refused to utter. Those wretched stony eyes forced the tears down Susan's cheeks, and as if this were sympathy gave the mother strength, she was able to go on in a low voice. "I had a daughter once, my heart's darling. Her father thought I made too much on her, and that she'd grow marred staying at home. So he said she mun go among strangers and learn to rough it. She were young and liked the thought of seeing a bit of the world, and her father heard on a place in Manchester. Well, I'll not weary you. That poor girl were led astray, and the first thing we heard on it was when a letter of her father's was sent back by her missus, saying she'd left her place, or, to speak right, her master had turned her into the street as soon as he had heard of her condition, and she not 17. She now cried loud, and Susan wept too. The little child looked up into their faces, and catching their sorrow, began to whimper and wail. Susan took it softly up, and holding her face to its little neck, tried to restrain her tears and think of comfort for the mother. At last she said, "Where is she now?" "Lass, I dinna know," said Mrs. Leigh, checking her sobs to communicate this addition to her distress. "Mrs. Lomax telled me she weren't." "Mrs. Lomax? What Mrs. Lomax?" Her lives on Brassabon Street. She telled me my poor wench went to the workhouse to fra there. I'll not speak again of the dead, but if her father would have but letten me. But he were one who had no notion. No, I'll not say that. Best say not. He forgave her on his deathbed. I dare say I did not go the right way to work. Will you hold the child for me for one instant? Said Susan. Aye, if it'll come to me. Childer used to be fond of me, till I got the sad look on my face that scares them, I think. But the little girl clung to Susan, so she carried it upstairs with her. Mrs. Leigh sat by herself. How long she did not know. Susan came down with a bundle of far-worn baby clothes. You must listen to me a bit, and not think too much about what I'm going to tell you. Nanny is not my niece, nor any kin to me that I know of. I used to go out working by the day. One night, as I came home, I thought some woman was following me. I turned to look. The woman, before I could see her face, for she turned it to one side, offered me something. I held out my arms by instinct, and she dropped a bundle into them with a bursting sob that went straight to my heart. It was a baby. I looked around again, but the woman was gone. She had run quick as lightning. There was a little packet of clothes, very few, and as if they were made out of its mother's gowns, for they were large patterns to buy for a baby. I was always fond of babies, and I had not my wit about me, father says, for it was very cold, and when I'd seen as well as I could, for it was past 10, that there was no one in the street, I brought it in and warmed it. Father was very angry when he came, and he said he'd take it to the workhouse the next morning, and flighted me sadly about it. But when morning came, I could not bear to part with it. It had slept in my arms all night, and I've heard what workhouse bringing up is like. So I told father I'd give up on going out working, and I'd stay home and keep school if I might only keep the baby. And after a while, he said if I earned enough for him to have his comforts, he'd let me. But he's never taken to her. And maybe I'm wrong in telling it, but I used to work next door to Mrs. Lomax's in Braesbon Street, and the servants were all thick together, and I heard about Bessie, they called her that, being sent away. I don't know that I ever saw her, but the time would have been about fitting to this child's age, and I've sometimes fancied it was hers. And now, will you look at the little clothes that came with her? Bless her. But Mrs. Leigh had fainted. The strange joy and shame and gushing love for the little child had overpowered her, and it was some time before Susan could bring her round. Then she was all trembling, sick with impatience to look at the little frocks. Among them was a slip of paper, which Susan had forgotten to name, that had been pinned to the bundle. On it was scrawled in a round, stiff hand, "Call her Anne. She does not cry much, and takes a deal of notice. God bless you and forgive me." The writing was no clue at all. The name Anne, common though it was, seemed something to build on, but Mrs. Leigh recognized one of the frocks instantly as being made out of a part of the gown that she and her daughter had bought together in Rochdale. She stood up and stretched out her hands in the attitude of a blessing over Susan's head. God bless you and show you his mercy in your need as you've shown it to this little child. She took the little creature in her arms and smoothed away her sad looks with a smile and kissed it fondly, saying over and over again, "Nanny, Nanny, my little Nanny." At last the child was soothed and looked in her face and smiled back. "It has her eyes," she said to Susan. I never saw her to the best of my knowledge. I think it must be hers by the frock, but where can she be?" "God knows," said Mrs. Leigh. "I dare not think she's dead. I'm sure she isn't." "No, she's not dead. Every now and then a little packet is thrust under our door with maybe 2 half-crowns in it. Once it was half a sovereign. Altogether, I've gotten 37 shillings, all wrapped up for Nanny. I never touch it, but I've often thought the poor mother feels near to God when she brings the money. Father wanted to set the policeman to watch, but I said no, for I was afraid if she was watched she might not come, and it seemed such a holy thing to be checking her in. I couldn't find it in my heart to do it." "Oh, but if we could but find her, I'd take her in my arms, and we'd just lie down and die together." "Nay, don't speak so," said Susan. "For all she's come and gone, she may turn right at last. Mary Magdalene did, you know." "Eh, but I were nearer right about thee than Will. He thought you'd never look on him again if you knew about Lizzie. But thou art not a Pharisee." "I'm sorry that he thought I could be so hard," said Susan in a low voice, coloring up. Then Mrs. Leigh was alarmed, and in her motherly anxiety she began to fear, at least, that she had injured Will in Susan's estimation. "You see, Will thinks so much of you. Gold would not be good enough for you to walk on in his eye. He said you'd never look at him as he was, let alone his being a brother to my poor Lizzie. He loves you so. It makes him think meanly on everything belonging to himself as not fit to come near you. But he's a good lad and a good son. Thou'lt be a happy woman if thou'lt have him. So don't let my words go against him. Don't." But Susan hung her head and made no answer. She had not known until now that Will thought so earnestly and seriously about her, and even now she felt afraid that Mrs. Leigh's words promised her too much happiness and could not be true. At any rate, the instinct of modesty made her shrink from saying anything that might seem like a confession of her own feelings to a third person. Accordingly, she turned the conversation on the child. "I'm sure he could not help loving Nanny," she said. "There never was such a good little darling. Don't you think she'd win his heart if he knew that she was his niece, and perhaps bring him to think kindly on his sister?" "I do not know," said Mrs. Leigh, shaking her head. "He has a turn in his eye like his father that makes me. He's right down good, though. But you see, I've never been good one at managing folks. One severe look turns me sick, and then I say just the wrong thing. I get so fluttered. Now I should like nothing better than to take Nancy home with me, but Tom knows nothing but that his sister is dead, and I've not the knack of speaking rightly to Will. I dare not do it, that's the truth, but thou mun not think badly of Will. He's so good, Hissel, that he can't understand how anyone could do wrong, and above all, I know he loves you dearly." "I don't think that I could part with Nancy," said Susan, anxious to stop this revelation of Will's attachment to her. "He'll come around to her soon. He can't fail. I'll keep a sharp lookout after the poor mother and try to catch her the next time she comes with a parcel of money." "Aye, lass, we mun get hold of her, my Lizzie. I love thee dearly for thy kindness to her child, but if thou canst catch her for me, I'll pray for thee when I'm near to my death to speak words, and while I live I'll serve thee next to her. She mun come first, thou know'st it. God bless thee, lass. My heart is lighter by a deal than it was when I comed in. Them lads'll be looking for me home, and I mun go. But leave this sweet little one," she said, kissing it. if I can take courage, I'll tell Will all that has come and gone between us two. He may come and see thee, mayn't he? Father will be very glad to see him, I'm sure, said Susan. The way in which this was spoken satisfied Mrs. Leigh's anxious heart that she had done Will no harm by what she had said, and with many kisses to the little one, and one more fervent, tearful blessing on Susan, she headed homewards. Well, that chapter actually was quite different than I thought. And yeah, still don't know what that word meant, but maybe somebody else does. I get the feeling it means like modest or upright, but I could be completely wrong. That's kind of what the context felt like. But yeah, I'm not going to lie. At the end of the last chapter, I was pretty darn sure that Susan was actually the daughter, Lizzie Leigh. So, look at that. She surprised me already. Let me know what you thought. Did you think that the daughter was Lizzie? Because I really did. I was expecting the mother to not see her until like the wedding day and then be like, oh my gosh, you can't marry your sister. That's probably my modern brain thinking, because that would probably happen if, it were a story these days. Oh, sorry. Knocked you guys everywhere. Anyway, thank you for listening. We have one more chapter of Lizzie Leigh to see what exactly all happens. I mean, I'm kind of assuming that it probably has a happy ending, but oh my gosh, the scandal, having a child out of wedlock at the age of 17 in Victorian times. Actually, from what I understand, it happened probably about the same amount of as it does these days, but there was more scandal attached to it. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that chapter of Lizzie Leigh, and I will see you later.